Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. I'm just going to leave it for a minute just to wait for people to filter in. And we'll be starting in just a moment. So for all that are joining now, this session will be recorded. It'll be sent out later. I hope everyone's having a lovely day so far. Okay, let's get going. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the People Specialist Lunch and Learn sessions. But before I hand over to today's guests, I have a few announcements. So we have at People, we have partnered with the Wales HR Network. And later this year, we are bringing a series of in-person events to people in Cardiff. And everybody is welcome to come. The first one in November, which is November the 20th, is all about recruiting with confidence. So we will have an expert panel series and we will have guests from Acorn as well. So we'll find out more about that in the link that I'll be sharing. And then we will be having a few other events that will be happening in February and May and September next year as well. I will put the link in the chat for that as well. So if you want to find out more about in-person events, then you can. We also have more People Lunch and Learn sessions. And at the end of today's session, I will share some upcoming events and the links to register for those as well. So without spending any more time on People, we're going to introduce you to today's guests. We have Emily and Olwen from Acorn by Synergie, and they each have 20 years experience, and they will be diving into the session all about beyond the CV. So I'm going to hand over to Emily and Olwen now to get started with this session. And actually, before I do that, will be these all the information will be available afterwards. We will be sharing the registration list with Emily and Olwen as well. If you do not want to be contacted after this session, drop me an email at tom@beamtraining.co.uk and I will take your details out so they will not be shared. If you have any questions, then also my email is in the chat as well. So anyway, that is enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Emily and Olwen now to get started with the session.
Okay, well, hi everyone, and thanks Tom for the introduction. Like Tom said, I'm Emily Meredith. I'm head of HR at Acorn by Synergie. I can't quite believe every time I say this, but I've got more than 20 years of HR experience within the recruitment industry. So, you know, it's my pleasure to sort of be here today to talk about my experiences, both as a HR person recruiting internally, but also in terms of how I've supported our operational teams with their recruitment on a perm and temp basis. So, Olwen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Em said, I'm Olwen. I also can't believe I'm saying I have over 20 years experience in recruitment, starting as a senior consultant, branch manager, operations manager, recruitment permanent manager. So I've generally seen lots of scenarios, good and bad, that I'm going to hope to share with you today.
Thank you, Olwen. So yeah, 40 plus years between us, which is quite frightening. If we had the mics turned on, I'm sure you'd all be saying that we don't look old enough to have worked for 20 plus years in this industry. So yeah, like Olwen said, we've seen it all, both good and bad. I was sort of reminiscing in my own head last night about some of the sort of more interesting recruitment experiences that I've had over the years, and I think the one that stands out just from a sort of comedy point of view was a gentleman we were interviewing for an account manager role whose false tooth fell out and landed on the table and sort of bounced across the room. So I think that was that was one, and that's a scenario that obviously you can't prepare for, but we will try and prepare you for or you know, so some more, you know, run-of-the-mill scenarios that you sort of may well come across. And I think, you know, by the end of this, you'll probably sort of understand that we could probably write a book on this. So throughout the session, obviously we'll be going through our sort of presentation, but we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if anyone has any questions they'd like us to cover based on what we go through on the presentation, please pop them in the chat box and we'll make sure we cover those off towards the end. So in terms of what we're trying to get out of today's session, we just want to make you aware of some of the sort of current labour market and hiring challenges that we're facing, which I'm sure you'll all be able to resonate with. We'll be looking at the impact of those poor hiring decisions, and we'll be looking at ways that you can actually try and make the right hire. So I guess that's the sort of key element of the session, really. So weird slide, probably. You're probably thinking, why are you showing me a picture of Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell? But when Olwen and I were sort of chatting about this topic amongst ourselves, we sort of compared to making the right hire and finding the right candidate, a bit like trying to find your life partner, because when you do put that advert out and you are recruiting for a person to join your organisation, the hope is it will be a long-lasting relationship. So there are parallels in terms of the personal and professional recruitment, if you like. So when you're kind of recruiting that life partner, you're looking at your values alignment, you're looking at their character, you're looking at that short-term spark or the long-term fit. And there's obviously an implication of making the wrong choice. And then the other thing that stands out as well is that it's a mutual choice. And I think Olwen and I will cover that very much today, in so much as when you're recruiting the right candidate, they're selling themselves to you, but equally you're selling yourself to them. I think that's
my take on this is that you are looking for your lifelong partner. You start off with all of your ideals, but you equally have to be realistic.
Absolutely. So we're hoping for a Goldie and Kurt situation. By the end of this, we're hoping that that's what you get. But it's not easy, you know. That's why we're all on this call today, because it's not easy to get it right, especially in the tricky conditions that we're facing currently within the UK. So this is just a snapshot of everything that's sort of going on right now, and this you know, there's news every single day. You know, even yesterday there was sort of labour market updates. There's stuff day in, day out that we're hearing. So the interesting ones on here, we've got unemployment is rising, so it's at its highest since 2022, 4.7%. Also, economic inactivity rate is at 21%. And what that means is, looking at it, you think, oh, well, this means there's tons more candidates available. I'm much more likely to find the right person. But we all know it doesn't really work that way, because the people that are available aren't necessarily the people that match exactly what you're looking for. So also it can slow down your ability to find someone, because you're dealing with perhaps more applications from non-suitable candidates. So yeah, it's quite interesting. There's more people out there, but are they the right people for us? There's also the rising employment costs. I think we've all experienced, obviously, as businesses in the UK, that since April we've had the double whammy hit of the NI increase and the national living wage, minimum wage increases as well. We don't really know what's on the horizon in the autumn budget, but I think we're all sort of waiting nervously to see what comes out of that. The estimation from the Low Pay Commission is that the minimum wage will increase by another 4.1%. Obviously, that's an estimate, which would take the hourly rate up to £12.71 and the annual salary for a 40-hour week up to 26.5. So there's staggering figures when you think about what the minimum wage used to look like just a few years ago. Rising candidate expectations are significant. I think post-COVID, there's been a real shift in terms of what people are looking for from their employer. So everything that we used to deem to be a sort of nice to have, things like flexibility, hybrid working, well-being, all those kind of things that perhaps were sort of nice to have, maybe deemed to be benefits, are now deemed to be absolute essentials. So we're having to revisit what our kind of employee proposition looks like. There's also a real pressure to hire quickly. I think, we're in a position, across, most industries in the UK that, performance perhaps isn't what we want it to be as an organisation. So therefore, when you lose someone, you've got to bring someone in quickly. They've got to hit the ground running. They're probably thrown into the deep end, and all of that affects, that ability to make the right decision. As a UK, we're facing an ageing population, low birth rate, people are living longer, we're having less sort of people coming in from sort of European countries post-Brexit. So all of this has had, an implication in terms of the people that are available to us. Automation and AI, as you all will have seen, are massively reshaping job roles. The skills that people need now are probably into the future, obviously, are going to be very different to what they have been historically. And we're still seeing real skills shortages across multiple sectors, construction, engineering, IT, healthcare, to name just a few of those. And then the legislative reforms, we're going to touch on that a little bit later as well. We've got the Employment Rights Bill on the horizon, which again is going to make hiring decisions that much more important. Getting it right is going to be critical. And then the competition for talent, we've just talked about the fact that unemployment's high, but we've still got skills shortage. So we are competing from quite a small talent pool when it comes to sort of certain roles.
Which brings in the counter offer, which is a big thing. Lots of companies are counter offering. They're paying more when they're doing everything they can to retain their own talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that within our own business, actually. Our sort of staff turnover this year is a lot lower than it has been in recent years, because I think, like Olwen says, if people are getting offers from elsewhere, there's counter offers, people are a little bit nervous, to move. So it means that that value proposition, what you're offering a potential hire, has to be, really sort of cutting edge. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a snapshot. And that's just a few of the things. There's a big list there, but a few of the things that are affecting us right now. So what does a bad hire look like? An REC report actually thinks that, or predicts that 2 out of 5 hires turn out to be the wrong hire. That's a really high percentage. So somewhere at some point, things are going wrong. And I think people wouldn't be on this call today if things were going right every time you hired someone. So what did the bad hire actually look like? So perhaps people aren't performing as well as you would expect. The skills don't match what you think perhaps they could offer. It's a poor cultural fit. There's behavioural issues. They leave employment early. Perhaps they're disengaged. And obviously that has big sort of financial and other implications that we'll look at shortly. So the cost of a bad hire. Again, REC is the Recruitment Employment Confederation. I probably should have stated that for those that don't know, but they're our governing body as a recruiter. So they do a lot of research around, market trends. They speak to the recruitment companies. They speak to client hiring companies as well. The REC estimates, and this is based on some research that they've done, that it costs 3 times somebody's salary to recruit the wrong person, because essentially you're wasting all that time. There's all these factors that we've got on the screen in front of us, and all of those factors kind of lumped together, it can end up costing 3 times the salary of that person just to get that hiring decision wrong. So in terms of what those implications look like, obviously productivity it can decrease because managing an underperformer, managing the wrong person takes time, and obviously we can't deliver perhaps on what we need to. We slow the team down. There's lots of mistakes to correct. Negative morale, having the wrong person in the team can obviously cause negativity and perhaps even conflict at times. Increased staff turnover, continuity of service to customers, I think most of us will have customers of some description. You lose that when obviously your turnover is high. The financial costs, obviously, we just talked about, but paying someone that isn't delivering, missing opportunities, it all adds up. And then the legal implications can obviously be significant as well. Anytime an employment relationship is terminated, whether that be through the employee leaving of their own accord or you having to make that decision to exit the employee, it all comes with an element of risk associated with it. And obviously, you know, employment rights bill touched, probably going to be sick of hearing that over the next sort of few months, but that will make hiring decisions that much more critical because the legal implications will be significantly more. So I'm sure we're speaking to people that know a lot about the employment rights bill already, but what that will mean is that unfair dismissal protection is likely to be from day one. So whereas in the past, you know, and currently you've got essentially 2 years almost to kind of part company with a sort of minimal risk, it's now going to potentially be from day one or with a 6-month or some kind of probation period, which is to be determined. So you don't have, or you won't have the luxury of thinking, oh, well, actually, I've got 2 years now before I really need to worry. And, you know, you can sort of part company with someone at that stage. I think the fact that these legal implications are going to be that much greater means that hiring decision is going to have to be even more, you know, it's even more important that hiring decision is right. Okay, so where does it go wrong? Okay, so recruitment's a process, as you know, so there's many different stages where it can all go wrong. So like REC said, 2 in 5 potentially hires, it does go wrong, and we probably all can see that within our own organisations. So lots and lots of different stages where it can go wrong. Defining the role is a really key one, having unclear or vague expectations. And I know, Olwen, that's something that you've seen.
Yeah, having a vague or unrealistic job description in the very beginning just sets everybody off onto the back foot, because candidates won't apply, it doesn't catch their eye, or even worse, the wrong ones apply. So, you know, clear, concise, communicate the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves, and please be realistic when you're looking, because all tick boxes are absolutely not going to be ticked.
Definitely. And what we find as well sometimes, and that's, you know, from a client and even an internal perspective sometimes, is that sometimes the goalposts are moved during the process as well. So what you're selling to a potential candidate, if it changes, oh, the role's actually, you know, we've decided the role's not going to quite be like this now, or actually the money isn't quite what we told you it was at the start. Those kind of things can also really go a long way to sort of derail that process. And I think the candidates lose confidence then in your ability to A, recruit properly, and B, to, you know, question how you sort of operate as a business as well.
Yeah,
we're going to go
when
into
when you're attracting your applicants, a bland advert or no reflection of reality, as Em sort of said, you going back to candidates, been slow to respond, these are all red flags to candidates. So, you know, writing an ad and posting an ad genuinely is a skill.
Mm-hmm. No, it is, absolutely. And I think that attraction piece is really important. I think, yeah, the advertising needs to be right. The brand, what you're selling, we've talked about that proposition. What are you selling as an employer? What is attracting, you know, going to attract a candidate, the right candidate to apply for you? So I think that's obviously really key. So it's all about your employer brand and what you promote as a business and your values. I think, again, the selection process is really important, and this is what we're going to focus on predominantly in the next part of the presentation. But you know, it's rushing that decision, it's not having the process right. We're going to talk about, you know, the interview process, assessments, and techniques that you can use to help make the right decision. But I think that's where, you know, it can sort of seriously fall down. And then you've got your final stage, which is your hiring and your onboarding. So you think you've made the right decision, you've got that perfect candidate, and it can still all fall down at that very last stage if the candidate isn't managed correctly. So I think there's lots and lots of different hurdles that you sort of need to overcome during that recruitment process. So I hope over the next few slides we can sort of give you some tips and tricks as to how perhaps you can help avoid, you know, sort of making those wrong decisions and the pitfalls at different stages. So this is the slide which I guess is the essence of what we're talking about here. It's looking beyond that CV. So, you know, who can't write a great CV. You've got ChatGPT these days. You know, you could probably create the most amazing CV. I could probably put it into ChatGPT now and create an awesome CV and look like I could be the best astronaut in the world or something. You know, we can all create a really good CV, but it only tells a part of the story. And I think, you know, we've all thought it and seen it. You see a CV, and I must admit, I've probably been guilty of it over the years, and you think, oh, bingo, right, that's it. This CV looks brilliant. This person's wonderful on paper. But what are they like in reality? And I think that's the critical part now, is how do you determine that the person that you're interviewing, that you're assessing is the right fit for that job. And also the reasons
why we've
why
got having Zoom and video calls and Microsoft Teams these days, I think, is perfect for that initial contact, because there's nothing worse, I don't think, when you're going for an interview yourself, never mind anybody else. You spend days preparing for it. You're up early in the morning, you're on the motorway, you're out to the interview, you get to the interview, you have a little look at the front of the building, you think that journey was a nightmare and the building is falling down. Then you get through the door, the handshake's weak from the decision maker, and you don't want to work for that person, but you've got to spend a whole hour trying to impress that person, not to be rude, when you could have done a 10-15 minutes Teams interview in the very first instance, just to find out, you know, what do they want? What are their motivations? What are their drivers? What are their career goals? What makes them tick? What do they like to do outside of work? Do they support Liverpool? Do they support Man United? Is that an absolute no-go? You can just knock all of that on the head in a first 10-minute Teams interview and move on. For me, the Teams and the video call, certainly for me, and obviously I'm recruiting as a recruiter as opposed to an a lot of candidates that you don't want, and only bring your candidates you want to see face to face.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip, Olwen, and you know, that's something that a few years ago we would never even dreamed of doing, is it? It's, you know, it's something that's evolved, you know, over the last few years. And I think, yeah, that's really important, and it can help then, you know, help you make those correct decisions. And I think,
and
again,
it's good for the candidate as well. It's not wasting their time either. It's minimal disruption to the day, but it can save a whole load of time.
Definitely. And sort of back to that sort of beyond the CV thing, it's just demonstrating, you know, giving the candidate a chance to demonstrate that, you know, they're more than just what's on that piece of paper. It widens your candidate pool as well, because if you're making decisions just based on the CV, the chances are unconscious bias will slip in. You'll start to, like I say, just think that person looks wonderful, and you become a little bit blinkered, and you think, well, actually, you know, Mary's CV was so good. I pretty much, you pretty much already made the decision before you've met anyone else. So I think you have to kind of, you know, see well beyond that to make the right decision, and also to make sure that there's no unconscious bias, discrimination, or anything else sort of slipping into the equation. And again, I think we've all been there, and we talked about this, didn't we, all, where you know, a client comes to you, or it could be an internal manager for me, and they say, oh, George is amazing, like, just get me another George, you know, get me, he's fantastic, he's the best, you know, accounts assistant we've ever had, you know, find me another one. And we become, like, you know, there's a risk associated with there, that we become a really sort of robotic, everyone's the same, we lack a bit of diversity. And not only that, we're massively limiting our chances of filling that job, because we can't see past George, you know, we literally, and we get this a lot with you know, our internal managers sometimes, and even, you know, our customers, because they almost want a clone of someone, which obviously A, isn't realistic, B, is almost impossible to find, and runs the risk of that sort of, like I say, that unconscious bias, that discrimination sort of creeping in. And sometimes George is only good for like 6 months anyway, so you got to think about that as well. So we're going to talk through some sort of more kind of tips and tricks in terms of like how you can sort of get the best out of people during the interview. So like Olwen said, that initial first stage Teams interview is really important now. That, like I said, that, like Olwen said, that 10-15 minutes just to kind of get to know the candidate and let them to know you is like a really important step, a really simple step, but one that can be really, you know, sort of save a lot of time and effort on both parts. You need to be prepared for the interview. It sounds obvious.
I was going to say, when you talked about your structure and preparation, clients really have to be prepared for interviews just as much as candidates. It's so important. There's so many good candidates that have walked away from an interview because the client hasn't been prepared, and the candidates walked away thinking, I don't want that job. I don't really like that person. It's not for me. Where it's just a lack of preparation, where the client hasn't had any structure to the interview. They've not sold the role. They've sold what they want as opposed to what the company needs. And they've not allowed the candidate to give good answers. So I know I'm, you know, skipping on sort of to a bullet point, but skills-based questions, clients really have to ask good questions in order for the candidate to give good answers.
Definitely.
Super important.
Definitely. And I think, you know, we've had to educate, you know, within our own team and do some training with managers, because I think, you know, sometimes there's a case, oh, get them in, I'll have a cup of coffee and we'll talk through their CV. It's not enough. You need to dig deeper. You want them to be able to kind of, like Olwen said, the questions that you ask, you want to be able, you know, to set the scene so they can actually give you the right kind of answers. So, you know,
I have
you want
so
them to
many
describe...
candidates, sorry, and that come into interview and they just sit listening to the hiring manager about the company, where they started off in life, how many kids they've got, what apprenticeship they've done, where they went to school, and they walk away after an hour and they've literally not had a question to be able to showcase themselves. And I do try to prep my candidates, and I'll say, I've not met with this hiring manager before. I don't know what questions they're going to ask. So make sure you know what you want to say to that client and get it in there, even if they don't ask. But that's obviously, that's if you're using a recruitment agency and if you're using a recruitment professional, because if you wasn't using somebody who's briefed that candidate to do that, and your hiring manager who you've just let loose to interview doesn't ask good questions, there'll be so much talent walking away because they've not been allowed to give good answers.
Yeah, and you want to encourage that real dialogue from the person, so they can share their stories, they can describe the situations that they face, the challenges, how they've overcome them, and then you can assess their decision making. You're much more likely to be able to assess their cultural fit if you're giving them the opportunity to, you know, to answer really good questions. The preparation we mentioned for the hiring manager and HR, whoever's involved, is key, but also we always make sure from an internal and external recruitment point of view that we really prep the candidates as well, because I think there's a misconception sometimes from hiring managers that we're putting our candidates to the test. It's not an exam. We really want them to be able to do their best in an interview. So we want to tell them where it is and how you get there. And like Olwen said, if the building is falling down, you tell them, you say, oh, we're having a bit of building work done, you know, don't worry about it, it's going to get fixed. Or there's a really bad, you know, roadworks on at the moment, you might need a little bit of extra time. Some of our customers also as well give interview questions in advance, and there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think, because I think you're basically trying to set someone up to succeed and not fail. You want to get the best out of them, and it allows the candidate to really prepare. You get to see the best of the candidate, and it also is a bit of a level playing field as well then, because some people are amazing at interviews, you know, they're brilliant. You could get a bit like the CV, you can have a person that's like a professional like interviewee, you know, they're brilliant at it. So what you want to do is allow every candidate the best opportunity to be able to show the best of themselves. I think that's really important. Be yourself. I think that's one of the like most massive things that I can think of when I'm hiring and recruiting or chatting to candidates, is that I'm myself. I don't think of myself as, oh, I'm Emily and I'm head of HR of a company, and I'm just me. I phone them as Emily. I phone them as, you know, trying to get to know them, build up that rapport. Like Olwen said, a lot of it's about, you know, we're football fanatics, I've got to be honest. So the football analogy comes in a lot for us, but it's like, you know, what are you interested in? What do you do outside of work? What are you doing tonight? So that when you pick up the phone next time and when you're briefing your hiring managers, you know, you've got information to share with them so that they can really build a relationship, because ultimately the people are your kind of USP, your brand essentially are the people that are hiring. So you can have all the benefits in the world. You can say you've got healthcare and an employee assistance program and a great bonus scheme, and you can get a company car, but essentially they are going to be making a decision based on the people that they meet within your organization. So whether that be, you know, your sort of hiring managers, your HR, to me it's so important to be yourself, and to, you know, build that rapport with the candidate, because ultimately that's probably going to be the final piece of the decision making. Do I want to work for them? Do I want to work with that person? Can I see myself, you know, getting on with them? I'm going to spend 40 hours a week with them. Can I see myself doing that? So I find that to be the most important thing. And recently we've actually hired a couple of internal people that have said, I've had a few other job offers, but yeah, they might have paid a little bit more, or there's other benefits associated with it, but they've picked us because they like us. And that's not rocket science at all, is it? That's just really simple. Be yourself and just be natural and build a relationship. So I'm just conscious of time. So I had a little dream last night that, and this is a true story, that I delivered this session live in like a theatre style, and I only got about slide 3 because I talk too much. So I'm conscious of time and making sure that we get everything in and have some time for questions. So we've talked about interview, but interviewing is only one possible strategy, one that everybody will use, I'm sure. But then you've got assessments and testing as well. You know, how would that person perform in the real world? So get them to do something practical. It doesn't matter what the role is, whether it's technical, administrative, whatever it might be. Get them to do something that shows them actually, you know, performing an element of the role. For example, we've just you know, taken on what we call a resourcer, which is someone that helps, ironically, find candidates. So we will give them a practical, you know, example and say, you know, here's a CV, here's a job. Do you think they're a good fit? How would you interpret this CV versus this job description? You know, you give them something practical and you see them in action, and that can work across, you know, many different sectors, like I say, whether it be practical or something more administrative or service related. You know, getting to see them in action makes it a lot easier to make a good decision. And it comes down to that whole, like, beyond the CV, beyond the piece of paper, beyond the interview. It's like the next step to really sort of dig in deep to see what they can bring to the business.
I have a couple of clients that use me for recruitment who do the psychometric testing, the GIA testing, and just a couple of things on that from sort of real life. One of the clients that I use, I personally think that speed and engagement is the secret to good candidates. Candidates don't wait around. They've got lots of your competitors moving around them, and they're all wanting the same skill set as you are. So speed and engagement is just massive. But this particular candidate, they have 4 stages to the recruitment process that my stomach sank when I realized that was the case. I thought, you're never going to find anybody or appoint anybody because people are going to snap the candidate up miles before you. But they're aware of that. So they'll interview on a Zoom or a Teams. They'll bring somebody in for a second meeting face to face. The 3rd stage is psychometric testing and GIA testing. And then the 4th is a final interview with the hiring manager. Because they have 4 stages, they are super slick at it. So speed and engagement is one thing, but it doesn't mean that you can't have more than 1 or 2 stages, as long as you know and you're super slick. The same client, another trick that they have with their assessments is, I place a lot of export clerks with them, and in the GIA testing that they use, I think they use Thomas International, but there's tons of others obviously that you can use. Some of the questions are literally primary school child could answer them, some not so, but they absolutely insist that the GIAs are done in that person's native language, regardless of how long they've lived in the UK. So if they're here for 15, 20 years and they are looking after the German market, they have to do that GIA test in their native language, and it genuinely works for that company.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant example, Owen. And on the sort of psychometric testing, we as Acorn, we actually do that with our sales teams. And what you can do is you can actually set up a profile of your kind of desired candidate based on the traits, personality traits that your kind of top performers have. And then you essentially do what's called a job match, and you can actually match the results of the candidate psychometric test against your top performers. So it's great, and it does help identify A, if someone is suitable, or B, if someone is a kind of like might be suitable and you can see the potential. You can then sort of know what their strengths and weaknesses are, so you can then set their development plan against that sort of test. So it doesn't necessarily always have to kind of rule someone out. It can rule someone in, but you identify their development areas, so it really helps you see the potential in someone as well. So it's just, yeah, another technique that you can use. Vetting and screening very much speaks for itself. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but it's that final piece of the jigsaw when you've done everything, you think you found the right person, but you haven't checked whether they've got the right to work. You haven't checked whether, what their references are like, whether, they if they need things like professional qualifications. You've just found the most amazing accountant, you've gone through to the final stage, you're there ready to make an offer, and then you realise they're not actually qualified, and that's a requirement of the job. So like I say, I'm not going to sort of dwell on this because it's quite self-explanatory, but it's those final checks, and not even final checks, you might want to do it at the start of the process, but it's those checks that are they competent to do the job. They might be brilliant and pass every other test, but are they legally able to do the job, and do they have the right qualifications, and can they pass any other tests and things that are essential for that job. The next bit of sort of vetting and screening I wanted to mention, because I think it really is a hot topic, is people's social media and online presence. So there's real pros and cons with this. There really are. Ultimately, the information's in the public domain, and I think as long as you make it clear to the candidate that we are going to be doing a sort of social media search, then it's there for people to see. But you've just got to be really careful in terms of like what you do with that information, and does something that someone posted when they were 16 and they're now 30, does that is that who they are today? And you've got to be really careful, I think, in terms of what you do with that information. So the best practice would be, it's just focus on what's really relevant for the job. It shouldn't be anything personal just because you don't like what they might have posted. If it's not relevant, then it's just just don't take that into account. And be consistent, do it for everyone. You either do it for all of them or you do it for none. Consistency is key. And yeah, like I say, be really transparent. We've had quite a few clients now that we work with externally that come to us and say, we want you to check everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. They've even, this is something I was chatting to Leanne and Tom about when we planned this session, but we've even had people actually want us to check on Interpol as well. So I was like, what kind of people do you think we're recruiting? America's Most Wanted is, hopefully not going to be applying for the job. One that made me chuckle the other day, because my colleague Mike is vegan, is that we were supplying to a food production company, and quite rightly they wanted to know if candidates were vegan, because they felt that if they were getting a job in a meat processing plant, then they might be doing it for sort of mischievous means, if you like. So on the sort of vetting sheet that we had to complete, a vegan was on the same line as a pretty much like a murderer. So I was having a little like sort of joke with Mike in saying, you do realize that you're a vegan, you're actually sort of classed now in the same the same sort of bracket as a murderer. But it's just it did sort of make me chuckle. But you understand why companies would want to be checking that kind of thing, because they've had situations where people that are animal rights activists or whatever will come in and obviously deliberately
I genuinely have had that example in the past.
Definitely.
I have.
So just to sort of bring things to a bit of a close, I appreciate we're really tight on the Q&A bit, because we've waffled as I predicted. So just a little bit in terms of us, we're obviously going to plug ourselves, but using a recruitment partner, like ourselves, really does cut down on a lot of the work. We've got market and sector specific insights as well, access to a wide talent pool, which is sometimes ready to go because we've already got those relationships with our candidates. We'll have access to lots of different sourcing techniques, different sort of platforms that we can use that might be different to what you would use yourselves. And we can let you then focus on your key business priorities and let us do all the hard graft when it comes to the recruitment. We can also offer a really consistent and discreet approach. So if you've got a recruitment project that you need to be kept sort of really sort of quiet and you can't advertise yourselves, then obviously we can run that campaign for you with absolute discretion and get you the right people in. And we'd like to think that we can help improve the quality of person just because of the sort of techniques and experience that we've got. So any questions? I think, are we going to go through the
amazing. Thank you both. That was brilliant and so interesting. So we've got 3 questions so far at the moment. So if it's all right, I'll just go through them and then
sure.
leave it to either or both of you to answer. So Jolanta came in. I think you've touched on it, but I think perhaps there's a little bit more depth here. So what would be the main red flags during an interview? And I guess you might have some stories about this, but knowing it would definitely help to avoid some bad hires.
I don't think that there are any sort of secret ones, in all honesty. You know, if somebody comes to the interview, they're not prepared for first questions or how much are you going to pay me? How many holidays do I get? Do I get sick pay? Oh, no, first things first. I don't think that there's any science behind that, if I'm honest. I think that if somebody arrives at interview unprepared, not dressed, yeah, for me, I don't think there's any science behind that. I think that red flags are red flags and they're very apparent. I don't know whether you've got any to add examples you've got,
No, I think, like you said, I think it's that candidate that's just come in underprepared, not really sure that they want the job. You know, you want someone with that passion to, you know, they should be equally. We've said about selling yourself as a company, they should be selling themselves to you. So if someone comes in and they're not passionate and they're not into the role, they haven't done their research, you could just get that vibe that they, you know, they might have another 5 interviews, they don't really know if they really want to do this. To me, that's that you want someone that wants to work for you. And like, again, like Olwen said, that's not hugely scientific or groundbreaking.
Trust your gut.
Instinct.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Chrissy asks what psychometric testing you use.
We personally internally use a company called Discus, and they're really good. It's not too expensive either. I think it's about for a basic personality profiling test, it's about £26 per candidate. And there's also a training module that you can do for something around £350 that can help you interpret the results. Because I think that's one thing is having a report. The next is knowing how to interpret it and what to do with that data.
And there's no point doing them unless you do interpret the results.
Yeah. And Thomas International, I know you mentioned, Olwen, I think they're probably the biggest player in the psychometric testing world as well. But there's plenty of other providers out there. And I think, like I say, doing them properly, doing them well, they add real value.
Definitely. But from what I understand from what you're saying, don't hang everything on the psychometric test. It's still trust your gut, still kind of.
Definitely. I think that's one of the key takeaways from this is that there's lots of different things we've talked to you about. You probably need to use a little bit of everything. So you need to do your interview, your team's core, your assessments, it's using all of it and not hanging your hat on one particular part of the process, and then it does come down to gut, and it comes down to rapport and relationships, and you know it's just give it
feedback that I've been given from psychometric testing is if you do it long enough, over a long enough period of time, you can tend to guess what the results are going to be. For example, if you interview an engineer and you analyze his or her results, they tend to be along the same lines as the last engineer that you recruited. If you interview somebody for an accounts role or an IT role or a customer service or sales role, everybody over a period of time, you can start sort of matching them up with, they generally come out with the same sort of skill set.
Yeah,
And
that
quite
makes
a lot of the
sense.
platforms do have that sort of job match facility as well that we reference, where you can actually, you know, put a profile in, and a bit like you said, Olwen, like over time, you know what a good engineer looks like, you know what a good administrator looks like, you know, they start to have the similar traits and characteristics. So yeah, you can make a good match then.
Brilliant. Okay, we're on time, but I really want to take Lucy's question, if that's okay. So as kind of concise as we can do it.
Sure.
Lucy says you got 2 candidates, they score equally on an interview. What advice would you give to managers on how to decide who to offer when they don't have time or capacity to run a second interview?
My advice for that would be go back to your meeting with them and talk to them about when you've delved deeper into their motivations, into their career goals, their personality traits, what do they like doing, who's going to fit into your team more. And that, you know, going back to what Emily said, who's going to, you know, continue with the morale, you know, who's going to match your team, who's not going to leave you, and sort of the whole reputational and all of the effects that Emily talked about before. For me, it's go back to delving deeper as to who that person is. They can both do the job clearly. Who's going to fit into your team and make a bigger impact there would be my advice.
And you could even have some like weighting on certain questions that are most important to you as a business, and that you know, there could be something there that then becomes like a deal maker or breaker. So having some kind of weighting on terms of like what's most important to you as a business, I think could be a good one.
I wanted to jump in before, but I knew we were running out of time when we're talking about the interview. Again, I go back to saying speed and engagement, fastest person, absolutely, fastest company, definitely. But having more than one interviewer in an interview helps this sort of scenario. So if you've got 2 people doing an assessment, they're both saying the same, talk to your colleague about them. The peer-to-peer interviews I quite like as well. So get somebody out of the team to join you in your interview, and who does that person like more, because they're going to work with them on a daily basis.
Brilliant. That's such good advice. Thank you so much, both. If anyone needs to reach out to Olwen or Emily, their contact details are here. You can also connect with them on LinkedIn. When Tom messages out, he will also make sure you have all of their contact details. I will hand over to Tom to wrap up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leanne. And thank you, Emily and Olwen. That was a really interesting session. These sessions will be available for replay in our replay library. And if you head to beamtraining.co.uk, you will find more information about the people sessions. The next one that we have coming up is on the 7th of October, and it's kindness for people. So we'll dive into the science of kindness, the benefits and the impact that it can have on leadership when you start to employ this type of strategy. So thank you very much for coming along. I am going to stop the recording right now.
Bye, everyone.